In a galaxy 5.87 billion light-years from the Milky Way, a loose-armed spiral called Sanewa holds a G8 dwarf star called Hoyuta, around which a single rocky world called Tayano traces a wide elliptical orbit, swinging from 0.94 to 2.21 astronomical units every 1.6 standard years, a long, cold swinging path that pushed its entire biosphere toward sleep long before anything on it had a word for time. On Tayano, something that happens everywhere else in the universe has never once happened. Nothing here has learned how to rot. The air is thin and short on oxygen. There has never been enough of it, not in 3.6 billion years, to run the chemistry that breaks a body down after it dies. So life here never developed decay. Instead, every living thing carries an old, stubborn trait woven through its own flesh, a structural scaffold that keeps tissue from rotting. Scientists call it the Tanu lattice. Everyone else just calls it what it does. Nothing that has ever lived on Tayano has ever actually finished dying. Instead, things slow down. Near the end of an active life, a body doesn't collapse in a single moment. Over years, sometimes decades, it decelerates until it settles into something between sleep and stone. Here they call this state the long still. The dominant species here, the Setoi, noticed this first, because it happens to them too. A Setoi lives an active life of about 160 years. Pale, sage-gray skin, wide reflective eyes built for a dim and hazy sky, 6 slender fingers on each hand. When a Setoi grows old, there is no single moment to mark. A slowing spreads across 15 to 25 years, attended by family the way you'd attend any long goodbye. Here, they call it going still. It is not treated as an emergency. It is treated as the last, longest stage of a life. What happens to that body afterward doesn't decompose. It doesn't return to soil, because there is no soil here, not in the way that word means anywhere else. It just stays, layer after layer, generation after generation. Everything that has ever lived on this world is still down there, slowed past the point of caring, but never gone. That trait swept through every branch of life here about 3.6 billion years ago, an event so early and so total that it's baked into every lineage that followed, including, eventually, the Setoi. From that point on, this world stopped being a place where death gave anything back. It became a place that only ever adds. For a long stretch, that didn't matter. About 400 million years ago, this world's living surface reached its highest point ever, its green peak. The era when the Setoi's own ancestors spread furthest and fastest. There was still enough nutrient moving freely through the system to support real growth. The bill for never finishing a death hadn't come due yet. It has been coming due ever since. Every year, a little more of the world's nutrient locks permanently into another layer of slowed, unrotted life, and a little less stays free for anything still living. Scientists here call this slow decline the long thinning. Today it sits at about 39% of what it was at the green peak. Not a collapse. A very long, very patient tightening. The ground beneath all of this is called the understrata, and calling it ground is a courtesy. It is a mile-thick column of everything that has ever lived and gone still on this world, stacked in order, oldest at the bottom. Down at real depth, nothing looks dead. It looks paused, faintly resin-slick, holding the shape of whatever it was doing in the last moment before it slowed past caring. About 40,000 years ago, hungry ancestors of the Setoi began digging into the oldest, safest layers of that column for the nutrients locked inside. That was the first extraction pit. Everything the Setoi have built since is downstream of that one decision. Today, about 34 million Setoi live on Tayano. Every one of them eats because of that column. There is no other source. Engineered catalysts, built, not evolved because nothing natural can do this, break the Tanu lattice apart at industrial scale, deep in the understrata. What comes out is a stabilized nutrient slurry. That slurry is measured out in a unit called the kanu. It is the entire nutrient economy of this world. The largest and oldest site where this happens is a sprawling complex called the Ranuko well fields, drilled deep into the oldest, most settled part of the column. None of this is done carelessly. Every Setoi who goes still is recorded, name, lineage, exact depth, in a ledger called the register. A separate order exists purely to track which named ancestor lies at which depth on behalf of every family on the planet. They do it as an act of devotion, not paperwork. Nothing that goes down there is forgotten. There's a reason the depth matters as much as the name. A very small number of the recently stilled have, on rare disturbance, briefly and dangerously stirred. Never a full waking, but real, and always fatal for whoever caused it. Here, they call it an early wake. About 210 years ago, a mining engineer lived through an early wake early in his career. His name was Wakuto. He spent the rest of his life fighting for a legal, mandatory safety distance above the danger line. The law that resulted still carries his name. It has held, nominally, ever since. Most years, checking that line is the most boring job on Tayano. It's done on a fixed schedule by the current keeper of the register, a thorough, unhurried woman named Ranuko. It almost always confirms exactly what everyone already assumes, that the line is holding, that the numbers are fine, that the ground beneath the well fields is exactly as safe as the law requires it to be. Ranuko had run this same audit 11 times before. Routine work. Cross-check the mining guild's own numbers against the safety monitor's numbers. Confirm it, file it, move on. She expected this 12th pass to look exactly like the other 11. It didn't. The mining guild's own numbers placed the working face comfortably above the legal line. Ranuko's cross-check, run against the safety monitor's independent readings, placed it measurably closer than that. Not by an alarming amount, close enough to be a faulty instrument, the kind of small gap usually fixed with an apology and a recalibrated sensor. She brought it quietly to the senior surveyor of the mining guild, a man named Tomase, decades into the extraction program. Who knows the shaft geometry of the wellfields better than anyone alive? She expected him to find her error in 10 minutes. He didn't. His own instruments, checked twice more, confirmed it. The working face had been running past the safety line for some time, through small decisions no one had ever meant to add up this way. One more office before she wrote anything down. An archivist of the Safety Monitoring Order, a woman named Senova, had spent her career logging the faint signal that rises from the shallow layers. Her own numbers had been climbing for years, slowly enough that no report had ever called it urgent. Set beside Ranuko's audit and Tomase's survey, all 3 numbers agreed completely. That's usually how the biggest discoveries happen here. Not one dramatic instrument reading, but 3 ordinary people's boring numbers, finally placed side by side. Once the 3 numbers were reconciled, the projection was simple enough to write in a single line. At today's rate, the mining line will reach this world's real danger threshold, the point past which an early wake becomes possible. In about 312 years. 312 years sounds distant. On most worlds, it would be. It is not distant here. The record keepers whose whole tradition is knowing exactly which ancestor lies at exactly what depth didn't have to guess whose names sit inside that window. They could look them up. Grandparents of people alive today. Names still spoken at family gatherings. People who are, this year, still warmly and clearly remembered. The Setoi solved death. Nothing that has ever lived here has ever had to fully end. And in solving it, without meaning to, across 40,000 years of entirely reasonable decisions, they built the only economy they have, around slowly, carefully, respectfully digging up their own dead. That economy was always going to reach the recently stilled eventually. Now, it has a date. The man who drew the original safety line saw an early wake happen once, in person, early enough in his life that he spent the rest of it making sure no one else would have to. He wasn't solving an abstract danger. He was answering one very specific horror, with one very specific number. For 210 years, that number held. What this audit means, is that the number was never going to hold forever. Not against a population that has to keep eating. It was only ever buying time. The time is what just ran out. Ranuko's report went, as it had to the current head of the Register Council, a woman named Amuri. There is no version of this story where Amuri is the villain. There isn't one to cast. The choice in front of her isn't between a right answer and a wrong one. It's between two costs, both real and both already being paid by someone. Hold the line exactly where it sits, and the safety margin holds, the one a mining engineer died having earned. But extraction slows further, and a population already limiting its own births keeps shrinking with it. Move the line, even slightly, to keep pace with a growing need. And the number that already failed once, quietly, over decades no one meant to cross, gets a smaller cushion to fail again. The senior surveyor feels this every day the ordinary way, at the working face, where holding the line already means slower output than the mining guild would like. The safety archivist feels it in a slow, accumulating column of data that keeps confirming the numbers were right the first time. Nobody on this world is hiding the truth. Nobody is pretending the number isn't real. For the first time in its history, the Register Council is holding a budget that can't be stretched by better management, better engineering, or more careful counting. Because the thing running short here isn't fuel, and it isn't funding. It's nutrient, locked inside the bodies of people whose names are still spoken out loud. Ranuko finishes the final draft of her report in the small hours of a long working night, in an office lit by the same warm lamp glow that lights every understrata hall on this world. She reads it through once more before sealing it for the council. Her own grandmother's name is in the register, at a depth well inside the safe margin. For now, decades of cushion still sit between that name and anything her own projection describes. That will not always be true. It is simply not true yet. Above ground, the Ranoa well fields keep running the same shift they run every day. The slurry surfaces on schedule. The record keepers add another name to the ledger, at a depth measured to the meter, exactly as they have for as long as anyone can remember. Nothing about the surface of this world looks any different this evening than it did the evening before the numbers reconciled. The report sits, sealed, on the council chair's desk by morning. It has not yet been opened. It ends without a decision, because none has been made yet, and none was owed by this hour, this year. 312 years is a long time, by any single life's measure. It is a short one, by the measure of a species that has never had to finish burying anyone. Somewhere in the understrata tonight, something that has been slowing for 600 years lies exactly as still as it did last night, and will lie exactly as still tomorrow, unbothered, unrushed, in ground that is, quite literally, and without exception, everyone who ever came before.